Hi, everyone. I'm Janelle Ramirez, Director of Education and Exploration Programs at Texas Folklife. Today, I'm going to be going over our apprenticeship program and the application process for that program. Applications are due at the end of this week, January 31st, 11:59 p.m. And there are a few components which I'm going to go through in the slides, which I have prepared here. So first of all, an overview of the program. Texas Folklife's apprenticeship program provides up to $4,500 for artist mentors to offer intensive training in art, cultural, or heritage practices to dedicated apprentices for 6 months. Fortunately, I cannot see the bottom of that, but we did start the program in 1987 and have supported over 375 traditional artists since that time. So artist mentors, what we mean by that are individuals who are recognized by their communities and their peers for expertise in a particular traditional art. And I'll talk more about what those arts could be. On the other hand, apprentices who work with the artist mentors demonstrate an intention to enhance their established skills alongside a long-term commitment to carrying that tradition forward. The pairs each implement a self-directed work plan and present a final presentation that showcases the results of the apprenticeship. So a little bit about the program guidelines and more details about, what types of arts we support. So this program is rooted in the folk and traditional arts, as you may have gathered by the fact that it's run by Texas Folklife. That's what we do. So what do we mean by folk and traditional arts? We mean arts that are rooted in communities. The members of the community share a common heritage, a language. It could be an occupation, a religion, a region. There's many different ways that can sort of play out. As far as the art forms, it can encompass verbal arts, visual arts, performing arts, music, dance, food, healing arts, crafts, kind of a wide range of things, but that again are sort of rooted in community, heritage, language, etc. Who can apply to this program? We welcome applications from tradition and cultural bearers from all over Texas, people who are practicing folk and traditional arts in the state of Texas. We do prioritize artists, mentors, and apprentices who are practicing their arts in community settings, and especially those who have not been trained within institutional structures. Often the folk and traditional arts fall outside of the purview of formalized art institutions. With that, we recognize that the one-on-one mentorship model may not fit the framework of certain traditions. So there are some examples in the past of supporting group or ensemble-based apprenticeships. It's really a case-by-case basis, and as long as you make a clear case in your application for why that needs to be the case, then we will consider that. So a little bit more about the award amount. The awards are up to $4,500. The final amount will be determined after the award is, after the applications are reviewed and we select the apprenticeship pairs. This award goes towards covering mentor fees, supplies, materials, and travel. Most of the award generally goes towards those mentor fees, and those other categories can also be supported through these funds. A little bit about what we expect during the apprenticeship program. The timeline this year is basically going to be 6 months, not 8 months. So that's sort of predetermined already, given the application timeline that we have. So again, January 31st is going to be that deadline. And the notifications are going to go out in March. So once those notifications go out, that's when we would be able to begin this program. So it would be over 6 months. And as far as, what we expect for those contact hours, we're thinking around 12 to 16 hours a month of meeting time. And that's something that the apprenticeship pairs determine and explain on the application. So these things can vary widely. It depends on the type of art being taught, the goals of the apprenticeship, the frequency with which the mentor and apprentice can meet, and of course the length of each session. So this will be unique to you and your proposal, but this is just kind of a benchmark of something to keep in mind. A little bit about the eligibility. So the apprentices must reside in the state of Texas. Artist mentors can reside in the surrounding states, US states only, so Louisiana, New Mexico, Oklahoma, or Arkansas. There's no age requirement. There is a waiting period, so if you participated last year, you would have to wait to apply again in 1 year from now. So the program does not fund historical recreations, staged productions of past lifestyles, distant past. This is not a historically focused program. We're focused on living traditions. So even though those traditions may be rooted in a long history or heritage, we are focused on the living tradition, not recreating a lifestyle or setting from the past. On the opposite spectrum, we do not support contemporary individual studio art projects. It's not the focus of this program. We also do not support ongoing classes for a classroom type of situation. Unfortunately, we're not able to support international apprenticeships either. And well, the years on this are a little bit older, but you get the idea that if you've participated in the past year, you can't apply again. I'm going to switch over to show some examples of past participants, and I'm not going to go through all of these, but we have some links that we can share where you can go through this on your own. The first thing I want to point to is this apprenticeship map. This is an excellent resource that goes all the way back to 2016. So you can see different apprenticeship pairs that participated through all the way up to 2023. If I click on one of these markers, I can see the name of the artist mentor or apprentice and the type of art that they practice, and of course their location. So you can see that people come from all over the state, and in some cases some border states. So like this marker in New Mexico, where we have a flamenco teacher from 2022. There does tend to be more of a concentration around these three major cities, of course, but I encourage you to explore this map to learn more about just past apprenticeship pairs, and some of these have links to videos and other media, so you can get a little bit more in depth with looking at the art forms. There's a lot of information here, so again, I'm not really going to go through these specific examples, but if you're kind of wondering, you know, who participates in a program like this, what are the expectations, what does this look like, this is a really good place to look for that. Likewise, for our 2022 apprenticeship pairs, we have this web page that highlights their work a little bit more in depth. So if you scroll through, you can meet the different apprenticeship pairs, learn about the art that they work on. This is just a great place to really get a sense for what these projects look like. And there's a lot of great photos and You can see their process. So again, I'm not going to spend time looking at these specific examples, but I encourage you to go to this page to see that. And okay, so those links are shared in the comments. Great. So you should be able to follow those and access that information, at least for the story maps. I think we need to share that map as well. So, yeah, I'm not able to share that. Mariela, if you're there, if you can share that first map, thank you. Okay, so moving on to some details about the program. Here is what the timeline will look like for the 2025 program. So the application deadline again is January 31st. So in February is when the pairs will be selected, and by March that work begins. So from March through August, the apprenticeship pairs are working together. They're implementing the self-directed work plan that has been outlined in the application. They're engaging in self-documentation, and we're also doing site visits and interviews. I'll talk a little bit more about those, but essentially it's a way of us keeping in touch with what the artists and mentors are doing. So you can kind of show us the progress that you've been making. Lastly, there's the apprenticeship virtual showcase in August. That is optional, which I'll talk about more, but most people do end up participating in that program. And also in August, we will, of course, ask for some feedback so we can learn more about your experience. There will be a report as well that's part of that. So what is this self-directed work plan? I pulled an example from a past application that went into a lot of detail about the goals of the apprenticeship. So in this example, this artist mentor really outlined everything that they want to teach to this apprentice in the time that's allotted. So there's really clear objectives, really clear explanation of exactly what the apprentice will learn in this process. Of course, your application may look a lot different depending on the art form, but I thought this was a great example of really outlining those specific skills and areas of knowledge that will be passed on. So that's focusing on sort of the what. In this other example I pulled, it's focusing on the how and the when, right? So we do ask the start date and date. We ask about the number of meetings or lessons. How long are those lessons? How long is the total amount of time that you're going to be meeting together? And then there's a question about the meeting place as well. So this may inform our plans for site visits, for example. So a bit about documentation. So there are these site visits / interviews that we conduct on our end, and those may be in person or virtual. But we also expect participants to self-document. So if you are meeting regularly, you are taking photos of, you're working together or the lessons or whatever it is that you're doing for your apprenticeship. And we have a guide that sort of goes through how to gather that content, right? And so specifically, how do you gather video content? How do you gather audio content? How do you take a good photograph? In the past, when we were not able to meet in person, we kind of were able to develop that guide to share with our participants. Because Texas is a very large state, it's really helpful to be able to do that self-documentation. So that's an important part of the program. The site visits are a case-by-case basis. Sometimes they will be in person, so that's sort of to be determined. At the end of the apprenticeship period, artists will submit a final report. So I mentioned that as part of the sort of final step. We do store that documentation, the interviews, the photographs, videos, and use that content. We may use that content to promote the program in the future, as well as to promote the participants' work. A little bit about public presentations. So if you've looked at the application, you've seen that there is a question about this. You are expected to organize a public presentation to share the results of your work. Ideally, this is something you do with your community, and that could be in person as a performance or a workshop or an exhibit, a presentation. It can also include things like YouTube videos, other forms of digital presentation. There is also the apprenticeship virtual showcase, which is what most participants end up doing to fulfill this public participation requirement. And this is a virtual event produced by Texas Folklife in August, where we showcase the different apprenticeship pairs. So again, that does fulfill that public presentation requirement, but we definitely encourage pairs to do this work in their communities as well, to do those in-person presentations that are a bit more embedded in the place where they are. Okay, so I'm going to move on to talking about the actual application itself. Again, this is due January 31st, 11:59 p.m. That's this Friday. And there are 3 components. So if you've looked at the application, which is on our webpage, could we add that link there to the apprenticeship page? That'll take you, well, it'll take you to the apprenticeship page on our website and show you a bit more about the program and the application, and actually link to the application itself. The application is on JotForm, so you'll need to use that platform to submit. If for some reason you have difficulty accessing that, submitting that through JotForm, please contact us and we will work with you on that. Okay, so I'm going to get into the actual content of this application. So part 1 is intended to be filled out by the pairs, which is the apprentice and the artist mentor. You're expected to work on this together. So this will be a really good step in figuring out if you can work together. If you can fill this out and answer the questions together, that's a good sign. There's some basic information, just contact info for both parties, and there are questions that are expected to be answered by both of you. Then there's that component of the schedule, followed by the public presentation proposal, and then it splits off into questions for each person. And lastly, there's the budget. And I just want to highlight, this is only part 1 of the application. So this is still the pairs, even though there are questions that are individualized. I'm not going to go into too much detail on these, but just to give you these questions, there are some pretty basic ones. So to start off, how did you learn about this program? Very short answer. Then there's the name and description of the traditional art form. So that's really important. Is it basket weaving? Is it conjunto music? Is it candombe? Is it, saddle making? Whatever it is, state that clearly and describe what it means. So if I've never learned about Música de palo, for example. You should explain what that is. Assume that then the reader may not be familiar with the art form. So take that moment to really concisely explain it for someone who has never heard of it before. The next question is about the communities that you're engaging with. So what community or communities do you, the artist mentor, and the apprentice belong to together? So this can include connections such as family, heritage, ethnicity, tribe, language, religion, geographic region, occupation. And then how do you define that membership in this shared community? So this is a really broad question, but it's broad because it's asking you to be really specific. And we can't really put this in a box for you. So you have to tell us, what is this community? How do you define it? And how do you explain how you are both connected to it? So if that is a community of artisans that work on a particular craft, so let's say quilting, for example, explain how you're both part of that particular quilting community, and by extension that tradition. Relatedly, cultural significance. So how does this traditional art form that you are practicing reflect the values or traditions of that shared community? And then going a step further, why is it important to continue and preserve that practice? So it's not enough to describe the art form or to tell us the community that it's part of, but it's this extra step of, what's at stake? What do we need to do to keep this going, and why? How is it connected to the values of your community? So that's sort of bringing together those different components. Learning and teaching approach. So how will the mentor approach teaching, and how does the apprenticeship prefer to learn? Will there be specific methods, techniques, or tools used during this apprenticeship? So that example that I showed you with the cartoneria was really good at explaining this, right? So it's saying this is exactly how we are going to learn all of these methods. And actually, I'm going to try to go back to the... So there's really specific methods here. Modeling with craft paper on a plaster cast. Making plaster casts, right? These are really specific. This is the kind of approach that you want to take on answering that question. And then going a step further, if the mentor likes to teach a certain way, has a certain philosophy of teaching, if the apprentice has a way that they prefer to learn, so if they're more of a tactile learner or more of a listener, this is an opportunity to say, well, this is how we're going to approach this because of how we are as individuals. Timeline. So how long do you expect the apprenticeship to last? We know it's 6 months. That's easy. And what are those key milestones or phases of learning that you plan to achieve together? So you're thinking about not only, okay, we're going to have 10 lessons of an hour each, but what are the milestones that happen throughout those 10 lessons? So there's the goal at the end that might be really clearly defined, but how do you get there? What are 2 or 3 milestones that you can point to that you need to get through to get to that end goal? And they might not all be linear in that same way, right? So there might be different skills that are being learned, maybe different times in which you're measuring those skills. So it might not be as cut and dry, but you want to have some kind of anchor, like those milestones that are happening during that learning process. Past experience and motivation. Why did both of you choose to work together on this apprenticeship? Please share any relevant past experiences, skills, or motivations for pursuing this collaboration. So ideally, you are not just meeting. You have a pre-existing connection through your art. Obviously, the artist mentor is going to be someone who's much more advanced, someone who is respected in the community for that specific knowledge in their art form, whereas the apprentice is going to be not an entire beginner, but someone who is not yet at that level, right? So there's still that connection of both being part of that community and that art form. So this is a place to expand sort of on the art, the skills, the motivations, which is different from the other question about how do you both belong to the community, right? So this is a little bit more specific regarding your experiences with the art forms and skills. Cultural continuity. How do you envision this apprenticeship contributing to the continuation or revitalization of the cultural tradition or practice you are working on? So this is really a question about impact, right? So why participate in this apprenticeship program? How is that going to impact the art form, the community? How is it going to support that process of continuing the tradition? This is the space to explain what the impact of this program will have on that cultural tradition. Okay, the apprenticeship schedule. So this is your plan and timeline for meeting and passing on the tradition through lessons or collaborative work. So an example, start date, end date, number of lessons, length of each lesson, total hours of post-apprenticeship, and then your meeting place, right? You're telling us when things will happen. The public presentation. So again, all artists, mentors, and apprentices must organize a public presentation to showcase the results of their apprenticeship. And so in the application, you're going to propose a plan for doing that. And in that explanation, you want to talk about what you will share, where you will share it, possible dates for when you might share this, ideas for promoting that presentation, how you're involving and engaging your community, and then also keeping in mind that there's different ways of doing this. So it may not be a live performance, maybe it is a workshop, maybe it's a demonstration, maybe it's an exhibit. And I already mentioned, you could do digital presentations as well. So you can really be creative here, but we just want a clear explanation. So make sure that you're hitting those 3 bullet points in the beginning. Okay, so here's where it splits off into questions for the artist mentor. So this is the more experienced artist who is going to be doing most of the teaching and passing on of the tradition. So here it's asking to describe your background and experience with the traditional art form. How long have you been practicing it? Who taught it to you? How did you learn it? And what role does this tradition play in your life? So you can tell this is a little bit more personal, as opposed to the other group of questions that was asking more about connection to community, connection to the art form. There's space here to talk about that personal experience of how you, as the artist mentor, have found yourself as part of this tradition. Then there's a space to talk about how it's important to your community. Why is this artistic tradition important to your community as you practice it? I think the as you practice it part is key here also, because there may be many different people practicing the tradition that you are also practicing, right? So there's the component of why is that tradition important to your community, but sort of what do you bring to the table, right? Is there something about the way that you approach it that's unique? If you're able to express that, that's great too. include that in that response. How long have you known your apprentice? Why did you choose this apprentice? Have you worked together before in this tradition? Hopefully the answer is yes. Hopefully the answer is not, I met them yesterday and we decided to apply for this. That said, this can vary greatly. There's people who have already been working with their apprentice for a long time, and there's people who are just starting to work with that apprentice. There's cases where the apprentice went and found the mentor and said, I want to learn this. Will you apply to this program with me? It really varies, but just explain that, you know. Next is, what impact do you think this apprenticeship will have on your community? It's a bit of a repetition of that other question, but more personal to the artist mentor. So we did ask a little bit about impact in that. I think, yeah, here. So this cultural continuity question, but those were answered collectively. So in this case, we're asking only the artist mentor. So that answer might look a little bit differently. So next are questions for the apprentice. Describe your background and experience with the traditional art form you want to study. How long have you been practicing it? Who have you learned from and how? How would you describe your current skill level? And what role does this traditional art play in your life? So again, this is really about you. It's that opportunity to show us who you are, how you got involved in this. It's that personal journey. And it's also saying, I'm a beginner or I'm an intermediate skill level. And then also touching on, why is this important to you? The next question, why is this artistic tradition important to your community as you practice it? So again, that sort of twist of how are you uniquely contributing something? As an apprentice, you may not really have a clear picture of that yet, but you should at least be able to answer why it's important to your community, and maybe you have a vision of how you might want to practice this. Why do you want to take part in this apprenticeship program with this artist mentor? What do you hope to achieve through your participation in the program? So the flip side of the other question that we asked the artist mentor, again, just that personal voice of what you want to get out of this. And then lastly, what are your plans for continuing to practice this traditional art form? How do you intend to share what you've learned with your community? So with this program, we really want to see that this isn't a one-off exploration, that this is really something that the apprentice is committed to. So this is the place to explain how you plan to continue practicing this traditional art form in the future. All right, turning to the budget. So there's 4 components to the budget: the mentor fee, supplies and materials, travel expenses, and other. Mentor fee is pretty straightforward. This is going to the artist mentor. This component of the budget should not exceed $3,000. Remember, this budget should add up to $4,500, which is the maximum award. The supplies and materials. I put some examples here. That might be guitar strings, clay, wood, reeds, paint, whatever it is that you need to do this art. Relatedly, travel expenses. So you may not live in the same city as your mentor. You may need to travel to meet with them. Include those costs here. Also include the costs of traveling to do public presentations. And I also say that we do expect that you meet with the artist mentor and apprentice meet in person, right? So of course that may not be every single time you talk, but there should be some in-person meetings. Lastly, there's the other section. So this could be a lot of miscellaneous expenses. If you wanted to include any payment to the apprentice, that can be included in this section, but it is optional. All right, so that concludes part 1, which is the part that you fill out together. Parts 2 and 3 are filled out individually. So part 2 is filled out by the artist mentor, and part 3 is filled out by the apprentice. These parts are almost exactly the same. And what they really are is asking for work samples and letters of support. So as you can see here, these are essential parts of your application. We will not review applications that don't submit work samples. Why? Because if we don't see work samples, then we're not really able to evaluate your commitment to the art. We're not able to see your practice. We're not able to understand what it is that you do. So that's what those work samples are there for. They demonstrate your artistic ability, your commitment to the art form, feasibility of your work plan, and the significance of the tradition to your community. Again, if you have technical difficulties with this part, please contact us and we'll work with you to make sure that you're able to submit these in some way or another. Okay, so what do these work sample requirements look like? Visual artists and craftspeople, 4 to 6 images. So these should be digital images. If you need to submit printed photographs, please let us know ASAP. Musicians, recorded performances, 1 to 2 examples. That can be a video, a audio recording. It could be on YouTube. It could be on Spotify, SoundCloud, any sort of streaming service, MP3 file, WAV file. I'll look at the different file types soon, but you get the picture. For musicians, there's that flexibility of audio or video recording, but we do strongly encourage video so we can really see what it is that you do. Dancers and other performing artists must submit 1 to 2 examples of recorded performances. So in this case, video is required. Obviously, if you're a dancer, we need to see that. And again, this could be a digital file. It could be a link to a YouTube video, Vimeo, etc. Lastly, storytellers or other verbal artists, 1 to 2 examples of recorded performances or 1 to 2 written examples of representative works. So if the sort of speaking of that verbal art is an integral component, you're going to want to submit those recordings of that time-based art form. If it's more important to show the written word and the verbal component is not as important, then perhaps you might choose to submit that written example. Okay, file types, a fun part. Please choose the smaller file option if you're uploading. So with audio, if you have the ability to upload an MP3, please do that because it's going to upload faster. It's just going to be less data. It's going to be much easier for everyone involved to be able to move that file around. The same with images. TIFF files tend to be very large. Some PDFs can get pretty large as well, so just be conscious of that. You know, we are sharing these materials with reviewers, and so when there's the opportunity to choose that smaller file size, I highly recommend doing that. All of this is also in the application, so you don't have to remember this right now, but I'm just going over it. For audio-visual samples, if you're able to share links to online materials, that's usually the easiest way to go. However, disclaimer that you should make sure that those links are active and that there's no password required to access them. So if it's on Google Drive, you really need to check that that is a public folder. If you're not familiar with using those platforms, then I would recommend just uploading a file. Okay, so again, this is in the application, but just a little bit more about what you should include with that work sample. You should have the title, the URL if that's applicable, description. So include any relevant information for us to understand the context. So that's, this is a performance during December 2023 at a cultural center that is specific to this particular community, right? Like that's giving us context of what's going on. If there are other individuals in that work, please clearly identify your contributions so we know what your component is in that work. Also, if you have a really long work sample, please direct us to the part that you want us to see. There is not a specific time limit on these, but keep in mind that there are human beings reviewing these, so we're talking, a 5-minute sample that really highlights your work, not asking someone to watch a 1-hour performance. All right, the last component here, I'm going to go over first the artist mentor letter of support, and then I'll get to the apprentice letter of support. So this is the only part of the application of part 2 and 3 that is a little bit different for each person. So for the artist mentor, submit one letter from someone familiar with the mentor's qualifications and the apprenticeship program's potential community impact. This person could be a folklorist or arts administrator, peer, community member, knowledgeable about the mentor's work. The letter should include the recommender's background or position in relation to the mentor's artistic ability, teaching or mentoring experience, and commitment to the traditional art form. The importance of the tradition to the community, and why this apprenticeship is important for sustaining that tradition. So you'll notice from those bullet points, these are echoing the points in your application. It very much is a letter of support for what's already in your application. And we're asking for that community voice to speak to your experience with this art form. So if you have any questions about, who should write this letter for you, please feel free to reach out. This is my email here, jramirez@texasfolklife.org. You also have the option to submit this letter directly to me or through the application. So if your recommender prefers to just send me that letter directly, you can have them do that and use this subject line here, 2025 mentor support and last name. And again, this is in that jot form application, so you can easily find that information. On the other side, for the apprentice, it's a very similar process. One letter of support, someone knowledgeable about the traditional art form, and the apprentice's potential. So this is the key difference here. We recognize that this person is not quite as experienced as the artist mentor, but they should still have some familiarity with this traditional art form and show some commitment and potential. And again, this could be teacher, artist, administrator, community member, family member, familiar with that apprentice's work. These bullet points again are going to echo what's in the application. So the recommender's background, their relationship to the apprentice's prior experience and commitment to the traditional art form, the apprentice's relationship with their prospective mentor, and the apprentice's potential to become a future tradition bearer. I think that's a really key point at the end, to have this person highlight the apprentice's commitment to this art form and how they plan to continue it in the future. And the same process here, you have the option to have the recommender send this letter directly to me and use this subject line of apprentice support and their last name. I'm seeing a question in the chat about that the email was different before. Those letters have already been sent. Please send me an email to, well, now I can't see it, but it's jramirez@texasfolklife.org, because I don't have access to that if it's been sent to a different email. So I'll need to know what email you sent it to so we can track that down. Or you can just have it resent to my email, whatever you prefer. All right, so what happens after you submit your application? I'm just gonna have a sip of water. Okay, so once you've submitted your application, it goes to the committee review. We will have 3 to 5 committee members reviewing application materials. This group evaluates applications based on a rubric, providing individual scores. The committee meets to discuss the applications and provide final scoring. The committee recommends apprenticeship pairs for selection. Pretty straightforward. Who's on the committee? These are some people that might be on the committee: folk and traditional artists, culture bearers, past apprentices or artist mentors, folklorists, ethnomusicologists, artist scholars, and we try to also have at least one member that is out of state, but also otherwise fits into those categories. So in other words, these are people who are in the field, doing the same type of work, maybe not exactly the same tradition, but are in the field of folk and traditional arts in some capacity. So that being said, I really want to emphasize the importance of explaining your art form to people that may be familiar with the folk and traditional arts, but they may not be familiar with your folk and traditional art. So it's really important to make that clear for someone who is not familiar with it. Okay, so here's the rubric that we use to evaluate applications. There are 3 main components. The biggest one is artistic quality and commitment. So this is 60 points of your application, which is a pretty large majority. That includes 2 parts, so artistic strength of the artist mentor and skill and commitment of the apprentice. Feasibility. This is really about how realistic is it that you will be able to accomplish what you're saying you're going to accomplish in the time that you want to accomplish it. We don't expect that in 6 months someone is going to become an expert or a master of a particular art form. That's very unrealistic. But whatever it is that you outlined in your work plan should be something that could be accomplished in 6 months. So it may be they learn these particular techniques, they learn how to present this, whatever that is that you as an artist mentor understand that can be taught and passed on in those 6 months. This is a pretty important component really of any kind of application. It's really saying that you're able to carry out what it is you said you're going to do. Lastly, impact. So this is a pretty significant amount as well, 25 points. And this speaks to the significance and the impact on the community. I'm going to go through these in a little bit more detail. Okay, so the first point on artistic quality and commitment. Artistic strength of the artist mentor. So on the column on the right, it's referring to where we're looking for this. So in this case, the reviewers are going to be looking to evaluate this item in the application questions, the work samples, and the letter of support, the mentor letter of support. So this is really thinking about the mentor, not the TUAs as a whole, but just the mentor on their own. So there should be clear evidence of showing high quality artistic accomplishment and skill according to the standards of the traditional community. The artist mentor answers the application questions, establishes background and experience as a master in the art form. So this is what you as the artist mentor would want to communicate in order to get a high score on that component. On the other hand, for the apprentice, this is the other half of those 60 points. Those work samples are showing evidence of artistic accomplishment and skill beyond the level of a beginner. So we don't expect it to be at the level of the artist mentor, but it should be at least at an intermediate level. And that dedication to developing artistic quality and skills in the art form. This is really, again, about that potential, right? I'm sorry, my headphones just died. I hope people can still hear me. If not, please let me know. Okay, so looking at the apprentice, the apprentice's answers to application questions should show a commitment to the art form and clear plans to continue practicing after completing the apprenticeship. So again, this is not a one-off project. We really want to see that continued dedication to this art form. And lastly, the work plan shows the intention to develop skills and advance artistic ability in the art form. So that's where you want to really communicate what is this apprentice going to learn in this process. And that's something that the apprentice and the artist mentor can work on together to figure out how to explain that. And the places where we would look for this, again, are in the application questions, the work sample, and the letter of support for the apprentice. Okay, feasibility. So this is going to be 15 points for feasibility. The feasibility of the proposed work plan and public presentation, as well as the likelihood of successful collaboration between the artist mentor and apprentice. So is this realistic? Is it realistic based on everything that you've submitted, that you're going to actually be able to carry out what you're saying? Also, the budget is part of this component. So, we want to see that this budget that you've submitted looks appropriate for whatever it is your activities are. That includes the supplies, materials, and travel that are listed. Use your judgment here, include what you think really needs to be there to be able to accomplish what you've set out, not unnecessary expenses or travel. And so this is something we would look for in the apprenticeship description, the schedule, the budget, public presentation proposal, and the apprentice letter of support. So a lot of these are sort of a little bit more of, data in a way. So a budget is just like, do these numbers make sense, right? Does this timeline make sense? Is the public presentation proposal that you have proposed something that seems realistic, right? And we are able to sort of assess that not only in looking at those questions, but also in looking at that letter of support, speaking to the apprentice's ability and commitment and potential. Okay, lastly, the impact. So there's two components here, significance in the community and impact on the community. With the significance, it's looking at the role and significance of that tradition in the community's life. So this may be a bigger scope of, what's the role of this art form in that community? Why is it important? The impact on the community is about the continuation of the tradition and how this program is going to contribute to that continuation of continuing this artistic tradition, and specifically in Texas. So maybe this is a tradition that is very well sustained outside of Texas, but not so much in Texas. And that could be because it's a diasporic community or because it's something that's more of a border tradition, whatever that is. This is something you want to make clear because this is a significant component of the rubric. All right, that was a lot. I didn't really think this would take a whole hour. However, I am ready for questions. So if you have questions, please drop them in the chat and I'll do my best to answer them. My email is there. So if you think of something later, please email me and I'll do my best to get back to you and answer your question. You can also scan that QR code to go to the website, and that apprenticeship page has a lot of links and other information. Does Texas Folklife help facilitate connections between prospective apprentices and mentors if needed? So going back to those questions about sort of what's the connection between the apprentice and the artist mentor, in most cases, no, we don't really do that because we expect that there's already that engagement with the traditional art form on both sides. Um, I can't say that we've never done that in the past, but in general, no. We kind of expect you to do that yourself. How is progress tracked and evaluated? That's a great question. So there are these periodic check-ins with the apprenticeship pairs. Those will happen pretty much virtually since people are all over the state. There's a site visit, at least one site visit throughout the program. There's the self-documentation, so we are expecting that you will not only outline when you're having lessons or meetings, but also document those meetings. So those are kind of the three things that we do to track that progress. And I'll also add to that, the public presentation. So if you're able to pull that off and show, that there's been progress, that's also part of it. All right, any more questions? All right, it seems like I answered all the other things in the presentation, which is wonderful. I think we've recorded this session, so that should be allowed. I'm sorry, I actually see one more question. Okay. If you're allowed to use your mentor's instrument during lessons but don't have your own, is it appropriate to budget an instrument? Huh. Okay. That's a good question. I don't know if I have the answer to that. I think that really depends a lot on the cost of that instrument. So you want to go back to those budget limits and see if that's something that seems feasible. If it's an instrument that costs $5,000, it's not really going to work. Or even if it's 3,000, that's already taken up with the majority of the budget. But if you're talking about something that's like, $150, then that might be something that could be in that budget. So my short answer is if it's a reasonable expense and it's necessary to the project, included in the budget. Oh, thanks, Craig. Okay, so if there are no more questions, Mariela, I think, has recorded everything, so we'll be able to share that with everyone soon. I'm not sure if that just goes on Facebook, but it'll be up somewhere. So keep an eye out for that. Please email me if you have more questions. If you wake up tomorrow and you think of something you didn't get to, just send me an email and I will answer it. So thanks everyone for attending. Sorry for going over time, and have a great rest of your night.